Do you need to learn Spanish in order to buy a house or even move to Spain? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. Hi, my name is Nicole. Welcome to my channel, Travel to Money, where I share about how to travel, adventure, and have fun on the road to financial independence. Thank you so much for being here with me today. This is going to be a fun topic to dive into, and I feel like it's one where there might be a lot of varying opinions. But rather than trying to take side of answering that question with a yes or a no, I just want to share a big picture of my thoughts that cover both the practical side and the human side of that question, right? And so I'd like to start with the practical side today. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and uh, the journey of 8 years since I first bought my house in Spain, as far as learning the language goes. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, around a lot of Spanish, and I knew little bits, but never really learned entirely. And then when I bought my first house in Spain, I had still not learned the language, but had begun practicing quite a bit, knowing that I would be moving there. I was using the app Duolingo and practicing between 5 and 15 minutes every day doing a few lessons. And those lessons really helped, but they're not really going to get you to the point of fluency or conversation. But I was learning the basics and really determined to learn more and more. After arriving in Spain, those first 3 months that I was there to purchase my home were really intense from a practical standpoint when it comes to the language. So, when you go anywhere in the world as a visitor, it's one thing to go to tourist places where you know you're going to be able to get around in English to some degree. It's another thing to be dealing with legal paperwork and just some things that are a little bit more intense when it comes to the language. And I don't want to say that it was super difficult or anything like that because I was definitely able to get around. However, it can be really mentally exhausting, right? When you're constantly translating things to better understand. So I'll give you some examples. When I would go to the grocery store, I would need to budget about twice the amount of time to spend there because I would have to hold Google Translate up or maybe take a picture and then use that to translate just some of the ingredients and things. Um, and just so you know, on the back of a lot of labels in Spain, at least in my area of Spain, you're going to have Spanish and Portuguese. I think a lot of the distribution between those two countries is the same. And so you see a lot of both Spanish and Portuguese, sometimes other languages, occasionally English, but usually Spanish and Portuguese. But so I would be having to spend all this extra time doing that translation. Even though my Spanish didn't get a whole lot better, that time, of course, was cut down the more time that I spent there because you get to know certain things. You get to know what groceries you like, and you don't have to do that every time. So it becomes less and less over time. Another thing was translating documents a lot. I would do things like Amazon orders. And even though it could be really mentally exhausting, right? When you're doing all of that, the good part of that was that I began to learn a lot more, a lot faster because I was translating things all the time. And eventually, it would be something like when I'm ordering on Amazon. Well, after 20 times of seeing the word order translated from English to Spanish, eventually I knew what that word was. And so it wasn't even that I was really attempting to learn more in those situations, but just as a result of the situation, I was picking up more and more. I'll never forget, I think it was on that first trip where I spent a solid 3 months. And that was probably the longest amount of time I've spent in Spain directly since buying that house was on that very first trip. And someone called me, I don't know if it was about an order or something I was having installed at the house, and he said something to me in Spanish and I knew what he said. And then I responded in Spanish and then he said something back to me in Spanish and then I responded again in Spanish. And it was a very short conversation, But I got off the phone and I was so excited. I was like, I just had my first full conversation in Spanish. And it was really exciting. And it was such a relief to me to know that I was picking up so much. So, my story is that not long after that is when the pandemic happened, and I couldn't go to Spain for almost 2 years. And I really lost a lot of the progress in the language that I had made because I'm just not getting the same kind of practice at home that I would be getting there because there you're almost like not I don't mean forced, but it's just natural as part of life in Spain. You go out to eat somewhere, you're going to try a little bit more. So I do think practically you could live in Spain without learning Spanish. And I know that because I'm 8 years in now and I'm not fluent yet, although I want to say that I am trying, and I wanna talk more about that later because I think what I've learned is that I have to be more intentional and not just hopeful that I will pick up more and more over time, if that makes sense. So I'll come back to that in a bit. So I do even know people that have lived there for years and don't speak Spanish, and I do think it's possible. Um, but there's also another thing when it comes to practical life, and that is that I really think that just you as the person going, we're not even yet talking about the impacts on the community, but I know for me, I love conversation. I love to talk to people, to get to know them. And right now, when I go to Spain, I really can only do that with someone who knows how to speak English. And that could be some of the Spanish population, obviously. I have a lot of English friends there, a few friends from America, and we have a lot of conversations in English, but I really want to be able to get to know more Spanish people. Some of the neighbors that just bought next door to my house are Spanish and they speak a little bit of English and I speak a little bit of Spanish. And we have so much fun together, but I really want to be able to have deeper conversations with them, which can only happen if I learn the language. And so I really think that even though practically you can figure out how to live there and not speak the language, I think it's actually more helpful to you just as someone who wants to be a member of the community to be able to communicate with people and to not always have to enter a conversation knowing that you're going to have to ask for help or get out Google Translate or something like that. So I do think, again, you could manage, but it would be better for you practically to spend some time being intentional about learning. Another thing I'd like to note practically is that a lot has changed in technology since even when I first bought my house back in 2018, right? So let me explain. First of all, you have AI, right? And it can do so much, whether that's like a translation thing in your ear, whether that's the ability to kind of translate live on your phone. There are all sorts of things that AI can do. Then you also have just the advancement of regular apps. For example, I spoke about Amazon earlier. When I first moved to Spain, I was using the Amazon app in Spanish and having to take screenshots. I would open Google Translate and I'm kind of going through this whole process all the time. Well, now the Amazon app is available in Spain also in English, so you can choose which language you want to use. And so I think there are two things happening here. On one hand, it makes life a lot easier, right? You can just translate things really easily and there's just no problem. On the other hand, without kind of the work of doing what I was doing before, you're not really picking up on the language very much if you're kind of leaning into the ease of use of a lot of these apps. And so I think there's some positive in that and some negative in that, just kind of depending on how you look at it. I have used apps recently where I can pull up a document from my attorney and I can say, will you please summarize this for me in English? And it will give me a quick summary in 5 seconds. And we couldn't do that 5 years ago, much less 8 years ago. And so there just is a lot of advancement in technology that does make some practical things a lot easier. And yet we could use that as a crutch as well in just not being intentional about trying to learn more. And then we have the human side of things, right? One thing I think as an American who travels a lot, you really do see a lot of Americans. Sometimes it's British, but there is this entitlement sometimes about the English language. I don't think that's the people watching this video. There is a lot of that in tourism. I hear it when I travel a lot, and it can be obnoxious and annoying and just not very honoring of whatever culture it is you're visiting. I think it's really important to always make an effort, right? So even if you're not going to learn the language, you should definitely learn the basics. And another thing I've noticed, even I did for a long time, and I really started to think about what it would sound like to me if it was coming from someone else in another language. And I think a lot of people will just walk up and ask, "Do you speak English?" And I thought, is that really the best way to start a conversation? And so I would just encourage people to learn a few different things, even and if what you're kind of getting to is, I don't speak Spanish or I don't speak whatever your language is, I think it's starting out with something like me saying, rather than saying, "Do you speak English?" starting out with something like, "My Spanish is not very good, but I'm working on it." Or, you know, something that communicates some level of humility and just your gratitude to them for maybe attempting to speak to you in English. I've met so many wonderful Spanish people throughout Spain who have been so gracious to me and have also helped me. I remember when I first went to Spain, I think it was when I bought my house in 2018 on that trip. And I would visit Oliva from time to time to go to dinner. There was a woman at this restaurant that was serving my table, and she was so much fun. And I knew that she spoke English. I don't remember why, but we had started the conversation, and I told her what it was that I wanted to eat in English, and she then said it back to me in Spanish and then had me say it back to her in Spanish. And we had so much fun. Anytime I would communicate anything, she would help me to learn. And anytime I have told anyone, like when I'm in a hardware store, I'll say I'm practicing Spanish and they will work with me and help me and they find it fun. And it's just like honoring of their language to say that you're trying and that you're learning. And so I think just approaching whatever situation it is with humility and a desire to honor the culture, I do think is really, really important, regardless of how much of the language you're going to learn. I would say if you're going to move there, especially full time, I would definitely invest in learning the language. And I think that is serves a dual purpose. It's both for you and for the community. And so I think that there's just no negative to learning the language. Sometimes as we all get older, I know I'm coming up on 50 now, and you can start to feel like it's hard to learn new things. The brain doesn't work in the same way as it does when you're a sponge at like 5 years old, right? But we can do those things. We can learn and we can take that in. And I think I have learned the lesson that I'm never going to get it done if I'm not intentional. It kind of depends on what your goals are, because you could take classes where you are learning the ins and outs of the language, you're learning to read, to write. I know for me, I want to learn to speak, and that is really foundational for being able to build relationships with people, which is what matters most to me. So I would like to take some classes, whether individual or group, where it's really focused on conversation. And so that's my plan as I go back to Spain throughout this year and probably years ahead of that as well, since I'm not there all the time. I'm planning to go and take some classes in Altea. I found an instructor there and I'm really excited to get to do that. And I've learned that it is an investment of time as well. That's the thing I always struggle with, because I'm always doing a million things. I'm a very busy person, and trying to fit in the time to learn a language can feel like a lot. But I know a lot of people are moving to Spain kind of in retirement or early retirement. And so if you find that you have time, I think it would be really, really worthwhile to try to learn the language. Now, let me give you a couple of practical tips. I obviously mentioned Duolingo before. That app really helped me a lot, and it can be a lot of fun, especially with just basics, right? But one of the things I learned was that, like, my small town in Spain actually offers free Spanish classes. Now, they're not available for me to take because the class runs for 6 months and I can only go to Spain for 3 months at a time because I go on a tourist visa. But for anyone else visiting the area for 6 months or more, that's such a cool opportunity. I do think the classes they offer are considered like basic, but what a great way to start and to know that it's offered there for free. You can, of course, sign up for all sorts of different courses. You could probably take a college course there, or even language immersion types of places where you can go and actually book a place to stay, and it's a lot more intense. And so you have all of these different varying levels. But I know for sure the thing I have learned is that it doesn't happen by accident. Although you will get better and better the more time you spend there, it really is only going to happen with being intentional. And so that would be my encouragement, is to try to learn what you can. Always be humble, be kind, and then to be really intentional. And I think it will get you a long way. But I would love to hear your feedback. I feel like, again, this is one of those things that people have an opinion about, but I hope we're all just honoring of one another in the comments. Everyone's story looks a little different, right? And um, let's just all be encouraging to each other. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this community. I would love for you to like this video and subscribe to join me every day where travel and adventure build financial freedom. I can't wait to see where your dreams will take you.